There, you hit it right on the dot today, 10 o'clock. It's good to see you if you're live. There's only a few of you live, but some of you will pick it up later on. And I hope that you do. And I hope that you will pass it on to others so that they too will actually get the benefit of uh, the training of the 12. That's the system that we're working with. I want you to think about some things today. There are some words that have become common in our vocabulary. One of them is evangelical. You won't find that in the Bible. And there are many other words, orthodoxy. I'm not even sure if you'd find that one in the Bible. And the difficulty, of course, is we're translating from English from Hebrew and Greek into English. And so it's hard to say just exactly which words will come across, but I think that the two words that I'm going to tell you about later, and you have to stay with me for me to tell you, the two words I'm going to tell you about later that we use constantly, particularly in publishing things, I think have taken us a little off course in terms of what Jesus wanted to do. Now, today we're going into a lesson that I've called presentation. It was originally called by A.B. Bruce as the sermon. I found that quite interesting because it's actually the way that we would define sermon today is a monologue with somebody in front of other people, and the recipients of the information stay quiet while the presenter does the presentation. That doesn't fit what Jesus did here. I would submit to you that it seldom fits what Jesus did. We put such an emphasis on the presentation. And, back when I was young, we had this newfangled contraption, and I went and pastored a new church, and they bought this for us, and it was a couple $100, and it was called an overhead projector. They'd never heard of that before. And I had a grease pencil. Some of you are old enough to remember that. And I would actually write on this thing that would be beside me that would project up onto the screen while I was doing my monologue. And they got to like it because it kind of kept them going. And so that then evolved. And I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, they developed these newfangled things called projectors, and they'd cost $20,000 or something. You had to turn the lights off in the auditorium, but you'd have the presentation on the computer that could go up on the screen, and that was really cool. And of course, we still do that. And then we developed this ability to have a camera. Everybody's got one in their pocket right now, and you can hook it up to the internet, and you can broadcast yourself easy peasy to the world. And you can make a presentation with that. You can walk around. You could do all sorts of things, and people do it. You don't believe that. Go and watch what they post on TikTok sometimes, and it's always TikTok is designed to catch your attention because we got people who aren't paying attention. We want them to pay attention. And there's some good things on TikTok and on Reels and all the other short form video. This is not short form. If you thought it was, you can turn it off now. It's not going to be short form because I think it takes time for you to consider the concepts and dwell in them deeply. It also takes an awful lot of production time. To do a real production that is sophisticated and professional, it takes about an hour per minute. I don't have that kind of time I'm going to go for about 30 minutes today, and I don't have 30 hours to put into production. I have modest capacity to do so, but I'm not going to. I don't even have notes in front of me. I'm shooting from the hip. But part of what I will submit to you is that when we understand the presentations that Jesus made, he didn't have an iPad in front of him with his notes on. He didn't have a PowerPoint presentation with the ABCD. It wasn't a linear kind of a presentation. In fact, he responded more often than not, almost always, to the responsiveness of the people, the questions, the relationships that they brought before him. And I'm going to submit to you that we've messed up over the last few generations. I do a prep video every week before we do this that I send out to an insiders group of people who have asked to be a part of my group. I don't push hard on that list, but do a little prep about what I'm going to talk about. And in those prep videos, I sometimes say things a little bit different, but I think that we've really messed up. I have favorite books. I got a couple of them on this subject. This call says The Training of the 12. I can't even read it. Ageless Management Principles for Developing Competent Leadership. That's not untrue. And that's what we're trying to work with here. But I think that in all of those publications that have come, this one's the oldest of them, and a couple of others from the 60s and the 70s, one from the 60s, I don't think, of the late 60s, another from the early 70s. What they do is they give us some really good information, but it didn't change the world. We've developed mechanisms and methods that have made blips on the screen, but they didn't change the world. And I would submit to you that what's missing is an emphasis not on the presentation, but on other things that we're going to discuss. So we're going to look into the Gospel of John today. We're going to look at one particular situation in the Gospel of John. This is Jesus' sermon on the bread of life. And it's from John chapter 6. Now look, there are somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 commentaries that have been written on the Gospel of John. And each of them is better than the last one. And I've not written a commentary. I've written a book with some questions that need to be answered, but called the John Challenge. But I'm not going to get into the depths of the theology, nor the arguments that are behind what some people have had. But I want to peel the skin off of what Jesus was doing here. In order to do that, we've got to get to the story itself. And so I want to present to you the context in which he makes this presentation and how he conducts himself in it. And I think these things are instructive for us because we're talking about the training of the 12. And so how do you learn how to do something? Well, you watch the leader do it first. And Jesus was doing this first. And the methodology and the location of this presentation, or if you want to fight for it, I'll gay sermon. That's fine. It's not so much a sermon as it is a dialogue, and that, by the way, is not one of the two words that I'm going to expose to you. Although I don't know that that one's in the Bible either. A dialogue assumes there's a give and take in a discussion, and it's not so much that. There is a kind of a question and answer approach to what Jesus is doing in this presentation, but he's not following, as far as we can tell, an outline, unless he knew what they were going to ask or say or object to, which I don't personally believe that he did that kind of thing, because I think he wanted the disciples to be able to do what he was doing. Okay, so you can go to the commentaries. But I would encourage you to open up your Bible and look at this passage of Scripture from John chapter 6. This is the only place that this is recorded in the Bible. And sequentially, in terms of all of our lessons, it comes way back earlier in the sequence. But we're here at number 27. You're going to read it for yourself. You know of it before, but I'm going to show you a layer of this that I don't think we thought about. And I don't know, there's none of the discipleship books that I've read have delved into this as I think it should be delved into, to understand what Jesus was teaching about making presentations. So here we go. He's doing this in the Capernaum synagogue. Typically, one of these synagogues, it was a a rectangular meeting room, and they sat around the edges, one side facing the other side. They make a good presentation of that. If you watch The Chosen, I really love The Chosen. And you watch the way they kind of replicated his synagogue there, you get more of a picture of what it was like. So it wasn't, it wasn't the auditorium with the platform, with the LED lights, and when the music's on, the smoke machine. No amplification. It's just Jesus in the room there. And in this presentation that he makes, there's 5, count them, in this passage, interruptions. Now, they're questions, but they're combative kinds of questions. And Jesus gives the contextual response to these. I put a question mark there because maybe Jesus was going to make the response that he made, and they just interrupted where he was going to go next, but I don't think so. I think he turned off the PowerPoint and went to another area to deal with them where they were. I think that so often we get into a presentation and we get so far into what we want to say that we go beyond where our hearers are. And that's because we have what has been dubbed the curse of knowledge. We know too much. We get too far ahead of people too easily. But Jesus doesn't give them in this presentation, as we might say in the vernacular, the whole 9 yards. I don't know what that 9 yards is, but it doesn't give them the whole story in John chapter 6. He gives them enough, and it's tough for them to digest even what he gives them. But you'll note, and we'll get to this later, that he doesn't take them all the way through to the gospel, but the fullness of the gospel, but he gives the foundation of where he's going. And it didn't go over well. And I think that we've had one generation approaching 2 of presenters, preachers, who are afraid to say things that might get people squirming in their seats. It's been said of me when I preached in church, you can say things that if you were the full-time pastor here, you'd get squeezed out if you said those things that I say. So, but I say what I believe to be true or applicable, and I don't believe that I'm always right, but I believe I'm right more often than not. And sometimes I say things that people don't want to hear. That's what Jesus was doing here. And I think he was setting the example for the disciples that followed him, that they too could be a bit controversial in their presentation. So this is the context of it. Now, it comes in naturally after he's fed the 5,000, and the Passover time is coming, and these Jewish background people, so they have the Passover time in mind. And Jesus doesn't say that he's the lamb, the Passover lamb, but he sets the foundation for that. It's true that John the Baptist, at the beginning, when he introduced Jesus, said he was the Passover lamb, but he doesn't say that here. So the crowd was really excited to be there with Jesus. Now you're in the synagogue, so you got 100 people, so maybe 200's jammed in, whatever. They're excited about this, and Jesus is a bit ticked off with them because they don't understand what's coming, and this is on his mind. He knows that the day will be coming when he has to set his face like flint and head to Jerusalem, which comes later in the Gospels. That's, by the way, on the order of lessons about where we're at. And normally this one's out of order here. He always had the cross in view. That's why he came. But he didn't mince his words. He didn't back off. So that's the context and the setting. So leading up to this presentation, the people have come to Jesus eagerly because they wanted more food. They wanted more, freebies, healings or whatever. And it's not entirely insincere, but it would demonstrate that they would take what he would give. And Jesus says, you just want more bread. You don't really want the truth. Your truth, you can't handle the truth. No, I can't do my jack. That's an impression on it. Jesus understood their true motives were less than totally sincere. However, he didn't stop at that and say, When you get your act together, come back and I'll tell you the truth. You went on to express some things that were far beyond where they were. Isn't that instructive for us? And we're working with people. If they furrow their brow and say, "I don't understand you," well, that's okay. As long as you don't just throw them away when they don't understand. That's what Jesus did. He was encouraging them on the road to the eternal food. So they'd ask the question about what works, what's God, where's the rule book? Where's the checklist so I can get right with God? And Jesus said, "Believe in me." Now, they said, "Well, prove it." And they wanted proof, just like Moses gave the proof with the manna in the desert. Interesting things, Moses didn't give any manna. God did under Moses' leadership. And Jesus was declaring to them, moving from where they were, having been fed this miraculous feeding, moving them from there and their understanding and bread that they got in their mind, moving from them from the known, the physical known, towards the unknown. Teaching always needs to work from the known to the unknown. So you can't work from the known if you don't know what people know. Yes. So he explains, and I'm not going to dwell on this, what the true bread really does. It gives you eternal life. You never hunger and thirst again. Your sense of spiritual commitment and knowledge and direction and finality is set when you ingest the bread from heaven. Clearly, Jesus is the bread, and he claims to have come down from heaven. Shocker. He also claims that he's going back to heaven. Another shocker. Now, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we know that between they came from heaven to him going back to heaven, there's this thing we call the crucifixion and this thing we call the resurrection. He is teaching that he came from heaven, therefore he existed before he came down, and he's going back and he will exist after he goes back. And John had started his gospel talking about the Word that became flesh and dwelt among us, and we've seen his glory. So you can deal with all of that. This business of the bread had to be broken up to be eaten. Symbolic, we understand that there's something there. They didn't get that when they were eating the physical bread, but they reflected back on it and said, "Oh, I see." When things settle in later, sometimes when you teach things that are unknown to people, they give you the one eyebrow treatment, but it comes back to them and say, "Oh, I get it." He doesn't explain here about his death, that this will give life to all men. They're confused. Of course they're confused. How could his flesh be bread and so on? But what I want to notice in this other layer that comes on this, in the middle of this presentation, and I say, how can it be a sermon? They're arguing amongst themselves. So it wasn't a presentation. And without that, let's take a break for 5 minutes and have this discussion amongst yourself. We don't know how it worked out, but it was appropriate in the context in this synagogue, apparently, to go mutter back and forth about what he was saying as he was saying it. And then he gets to the drinking his blood out. That's disgusting. You can't have life without you participating in this thing. This is really confusing. And the crowd is totally disapproving of this. And he said the Son of Man's got to go back to heaven. It doesn't make any sense in the context historically. But if we see now, as we look back, this tremendous blossoming of the church in that New Testament era, we went from these, I'm saying, a crowded synagogue of 200 people to, in a few short decades, maybe 6, 7 decades, to it's estimated 500,000 people who were buying this really strange message. So it works when you present some things that people don't know in a way that it sticks in their mind, that it gets to them later. The true bread does all these things. It's living bread and so on. Again, you go through the passage yourself from John chapter 6 and see all the strange things that Jesus says that enlivens some in the crowd. He is talking about the resurrection, but he doesn't. He talks about the last day and this going on after death. You couldn't say, I believe in Jesus and believe there's not life after death, because quite clearly from this and other passages, he's explaining that there is an eternal state. There is something after death. He says, you had Moses that God gave you, and the manna, God gave the manna under Moses, but it didn't stop them all from dying in the desert. So he wasn't permanent. They wanted back some miraculous thing like that. And he's saying, no, wait, that's something much better for you. And what he's promising is giving endless existence, and you will not die. You will die physically here, but you will not die. You'll remain, the real you will remain alive eternally. There's so many people in the churches that are aligned with the evangelical movement. There's so many people, maybe a quarter of them, who do not believe really in life after death, and they certainly don't believe in hell, that the Bible teaches this eternal state of punishment. And I understand it logically. How can a finite 80 years of sin deserve an infinite punishment? And I say, well, you just don't understand what an affront to God all of our sin is, and how his sacrifice for us took care of our sin if we obey him, and that if we don't, then we deserve what we get. People need this hope of immortality. They really do. Many of the world religions have a kind of hope of immortality, of some form of reincarnation. But everybody knows if I go up, if I do well in life, in the next life, and go down if I do bad, then, man, I'm not coming back as a horse. I'm coming back as a dog. Well, I'm coming back as a flea on the dog, because I know what a mixed set of motives I have, and everybody does. So that belief that you're coming back in another form doesn't carry hope with it. Apart from the fact it's just not true. It doesn't carry hope with it. But the gospel does. Well, you believe in Jesus. You know this. If you're watching this, you know this. You knew all of this material that we're dealing with here from John chapter 6. At least I certainly hope you do. And if you don't, go and study it for yourself. And if you want more information, get in touch with me. I'm always available. You can find me. Just Google Gary V. Carter and you'll find me. You'll find my email address and my phone number. And I talk to strangers from time to time, and you're welcome to be one of those. But I want you to grasp some things here. We've melded, is that the word? Molded, maybe it's a better word, I'm not sure. Things together. And that's made it confusion down through Christian history. We know the story of the Last Supper, which comes many chapters later in the Gospel of John, historically much later in this sermon. And it doesn't refer to the Last Supper, really. It refers to, before he's even said directly that he's going to die, but this bread that he's talking about, he's taken the physical bread. There's some symbolism here. And the language that he used rose from the present situation that he was in. And it is faith alone that gets the blessing, belief in Jesus. That's not the word that is not the Bible. That's in the Bible all the time. It's in there not in a noun form, but in a verb form, an action verb, to believe, 98 times in the Gospel of John. So what are these two words that I say aren't there that we get mixed up? Well, one ends in ism and one ends in ship. That's the clue you're going to get from me. Let me just go to another thing here. I looked up on Gemini. What does it mean when you add the word ship to the end of the word? Well, that's a state or condition or qualities, and they say in leadership, ownership, friendship, scholarship. Or it's a skill or an art. It could be craftsmanship, horsemanship. It's a group of people. I don't know that. It says lordship. I guess that's the body of lords. A rank or an office. He has kingship, or he has stewardship because he's a steward. That's what it says about words that end in ship. And the other word ends in ism, such as capitalism, socialism. And this is primarily used of a set of beliefs that someone has, and they believe in socialism or whatever. It's a terrible bad word for some people. And Buddhism is another one of those ism words. Ism could be describing how somebody lives, in heroism, plagiarism, so on. It talks about journalism, activism, and so on. So the two words, one ending in ship and one ending in ism, is evangelship and disciplism. Did you know those words are not in the Bible? Yeah, you know those aren't. Did you know that evangelism is not in the Bible? In the Greek language, that would translate this set of concepts that we call evangelism, where we try to take somebody from being a non-believer to a believer, or as I like to say, moving from hell to heaven. And we call that evangelism. Then we say discipleship. Discipleship is not a word in the Bible. There is the word using the concept of disciple, or make disciple, as a disciple maker. But the word is almost always used just to describe a person as a disciple, an individual who is a disciple. And so we created the silos with evangelism and discipleship. And I don't see that in the way Jesus was approaching people. I don't see it at all. Do you, when it comes right down to it, really see in Jesus saying, well, this was evangelism, and now that you believe, we're going to put you through this course on discipleship. I'm not really trying to dismantle the words, but I'm trying to get into the concepts behind them. What we see and what Jesus is talking about here with these people is he's got his 12, who presumably are among the 100 or 200 in the synagogue, and he's teaching the other people who don't get it yet, but these disciples are starting to clue in, and he's really training them on how they're going to present things. And he's not saying this is the evangelism. So we have a budget line for evangelism. We have a budget line for discipleship. This is a continuum, folks. This takes people from the unknown to the known. And there will be a moment when they pass from death to life. And they may or may not be able to identify it. But we will be able to identify when they pass from death to life, because we'll see the emergence of new character and new life in them. So this is Christian conversion is not about, okay, what's the list? That's what this started this dialogue, this discussion in Jesus' presentation. What's the list? Tell me what the list is, and I'll see if I'm ready to check the boxes. We have done so much that's created. This is what you must do. Now, that's easy. People like lists of the do's and don'ts, and they're not entirely bad. I'm not throwing out all of the idea of that. But the why behind it is so important. Someday, when you see me in another video in another case, but not on this, I am going to talk about that whole business of we never taught in this last few generations enough about the why. These discipleship books that we talked about talk somewhat about the how, but all of our education for ministry, for people who go on vocational ministry, is tilted towards monologue presentations and studying the thing, getting it ready, organizing. It's kind of like 3 points in a poem. You get in your outline and so on. And that's not the emphasis that Jesus had. The how are we going to move people, the why has to do with getting into their their psyche and letting the Spirit of God enliven them little by little by little, and changing the way they think, which will change the way they live. And it's just way too easy to get somebody to sign a form that says, yep, I'm in. And they may or may not be at that moment in time. But if they say, yeah, I'm a card-carrying Christian, I got it right here in my wallet, then, that will disable them from understanding this continuum of getting better and better. There are approximately half of the people who will say that they've accepted Jesus as their personal Savior. I think that phrase myself. But they acknowledged Jesus in some measure, and they don't go to church. No, it's a continuum, folks. We got to get them started from the outside and welcome them into the inside and demonstrate the life that the church is supposed to demonstrate with all of the one another's in the Bible. We get there early. We stay late. Why? Not because it's a rule, but because it's relationship building time. It gives us opportunity to encourage and comfort people who are a bit downhearted and make them want to come back in the next week. This isn't about, well, we have an evangelistic service. That's for the people who are on the outside. All of you can come and, bring your friends and cross runs and say, you better listen, buddy, or you're out of this. We welcome them wherever they are. It's complicated. Now, this discipleship is not a 13-lesson program that you can put in a book, and there's some very good ones there. It's a process, and it goes at their speed, whatever that is. We have to love them, and that's the primary thing that we have to do as they see us loving one another, and they get in on the love, and it glows out to them. It's not a simple set of scripts. So that's where we've got to think differently. We've got to move from what they already know and where they're at to what they don't know. And when they come from a different world religion, they don't know who Jesus is. They don't know. They maybe have seen a cross on top of the building, but they don't know what the significance is. Everybody died, didn't they? They probably, I don't know why we don't put a rock up on top of the churches, the empty tomb, because that would be a far better symbol than the cross. But they don't know, so you've got to patiently teach them. And you answer the questions, this is important, what Jesus did, in the order that they ask them. Well, you also answer the questions with an order in mind that we're going to need to get to this blank that they didn't get, but I need to deal with what they're asking right now, and they will only ask to the degree that they see something that's attractive to them, that's warm and loving. And that may start with you as an individual, but if they like you, then they're going to want to meet your friends and see if they like their friends. And it would be extremely out of the realm of reasonableness to expect them to not like you, but say, well, I'll give your friends a chance. No, this is a community of faith, and it needs servant leadership. It needs people at the top, not just one, but a group of leaders who exhibit what they're supposed to exhibit, not when they're on duty, not to hear that you're elected as deacon and then you're on sabbatical so you don't do it. No, it's who you are. It matters not the office that you hold. This is so important that we grow up in him and become more and more what he's called us to be. You will see as you look at how Jesus approached this thing, that observation for the 12 was essential for them to understand the message to the other people. Not all of them got it, but that wasn't the important thing. The important thing was Jesus was training the 12 on how you go about it. The number one reason that people don't invite people to church, according to recent research, is they reject my invitations, to which I say, duh, of course. They rejected Jesus as well. But not everybody does. Some people will show an interest. Some won't. Observation of you being the inviter, if you're the leader, you being out in front and demonstrating the quality characteristics that God's built within you, and you become that attractive person, not nasty, top down, hey, straighten up, people, stand in line. No, that they see they want to relate to you and have interaction with you. And interaction was essential It's absolutely necessary. And the interaction that they gave here was, and Jesus was very direct in his answers. They'd ask a question. They'd say, prove it. And he'd say, well, you're looking for proof, but, and he talked to them through it all. Um, there, when you're living as Jesus asked us to live, there's going to be some friction. It's inevitable. And that friction, we hope, won't drive people away, but sometimes it does. But sometimes they get over it when they see you continue to love, and the warmth of the fellowship, even though they don't always agree with everything, is so important. Um, you've got to accept the fact that there's going to be some mystery and some ambiguity in the work that you have as you work with people. And if you're going to be like Jesus, you're going to be able to handle that frustration. Uh, Jesus was more frustrated with the disciples than he was with the unbelievers. I think you can get the clues of that in the New Testament. I think that as you study and understand the New Testament yourself and you delve deeper and deeper into it and you think about it, then the character builds within that you can be the example to others. I think when we separated evangelism from discipleship, we did ourselves a big disservice. We said, this is an evangelistic crusade. The evangelistic crusade is, according to Jesus, this is how they're going to know you're my disciples. Not by the quality of the music, not by the quality of the presentation, not by the fact that that individual is a famous individual who gave a monologue, not by all that stuff. They're going to know because they see there's love there. How are they going to see that when you're sitting there all in rows, looking up the lighted platform from the dark auditorium, and everything goes on up there? And when you get up to leave, nobody says hello to you. Nobody inquires about what your needs are or where you're at in life. That ain't it. This is how we know that we're his disciples, if we have a love for one another. So I'd rather not call it a sermon. I'd rather call it an interactive presentation. You can think about that, and you can take that forward, and you can click on the like button here. You can smash that subscribe button. I don't know why you smash it. You can take this link of this broadcast and pass it on to other people. We're way down at number 27, and you can pass that on to others. You can say, can I sit down with you and watch this for half an hour with you? I've done more than half an hour today because I'm really hot on this subject. But I want you to come back next week, and I want you to pass it on. So God bless you, and we'll see you soon.